The morning sun painted the palace walls in shades of gold and amber. As Emma walked along the cobblestone path that bordered the royal gardens, she was only 14 years old, with brown hair tied back in a simple ponytail and a backpack slung over one shoulder. School had just ended for the day. She was taking her usual shortcut home through the public walkway that ran alongside the palace grounds. The path was popular among locals because it was peaceful, lined with old oak trees, and always felt safe because of the royal guards stationed nearby. Emma hummed a tune she had learned in music class that day, her mind wandering between thoughts of homework and the weekend plans she had made with her friends. The afternoon air was warm, and tourists were scattered around taking photographs of the magnificent palace architecture. Everything seemed perfectly normal and ordinary. She had walked this same path hundreds of times before, ever since her family moved to the neighborhood 3 years ago. Her mother worked at a bakery just 2 blocks away, and her father was a taxi driver who often picked her up after his afternoon shift. As Emma rounded a corner near the eastern wall of the palace, she noticed the crowd of tourists had thinned out. This section of the path was quieter, shadowed by tall hedges that separated the public walkway from the private palace grounds. She could hear birds chirping in the trees and the distant sound of a fountain splashing somewhere in the royal gardens. Her footsteps echoed softly on the stones beneath her feet. What Emma did not notice was the man who had been following her for the past several minutes. He was tall and wore a dark jacket despite the warm weather, with a cap pulled low over his face. He had watched her leave the school gates, maintaining a careful distance as she walked through the streets toward the palace path. His hands were buried deep in his pockets. His eyes never left the young girl ahead of him. Marcus stood at his post near the palace gate, exactly where he had stood every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon for the past 8 years. He was a royal guard, 32 years old, with a military background that had prepared him well for his duties. His uniform was immaculate as always, dark navy with gold buttons that caught the sunlight. He stood at attention with his hands clasped behind his back, his eyes constantly scanning the area as he had been trained to do. Most days passed without incident, filled with routine patrols, tourist directions, and the occasional lost child reunited with worried parents. Marcus took his job seriously, perhaps more seriously than some of his colleagues. He believed that wearing the uniform meant something important. It meant protecting people, maintaining order, and being ready to act when others might freeze. His commanding officer had once told him that a good guard sees everything but reacts to nothing unless absolutely necessary. Marcus had taken those words to heart, developing an almost sixth sense for when something was wrong. On this particular afternoon, Marcus noticed the girl with the backpack walking along the path. He recognized her because she passed by his post regularly, always alone, always looking lost in her own thoughts. She seemed like a good kid, the kind who stayed out of trouble and minded her own business. He watched her progress along the path, his eyes following her automatically as part of his constant surveillance of the area. Then Marcus noticed the man in the dark jacket. At first, there was nothing particularly alarming about him. Plenty of people walked along the palace path every day. But something made Marcus pay closer attention. Perhaps it was the way the man kept his head down, or how he maintained exactly the same distance behind the girl, or the fact that his hands never left his pockets. Marcus had learned to trust his instincts. His instincts were telling him that something was not right. The guard shifted his weight slightly, his eyes narrowing as he watched the scene unfold. The girl was approaching the quieter section of the path now, where the hedges grew taller and the tourists rarely ventured because there was less to see. The man in the dark jacket quickened his pace ever so slightly, closing the gap between himself and the unsuspecting teenager. Marcus felt his heartbeat increase. He told himself he might be overreacting, that the man could simply be another pedestrian heading in the same direction. But years of training and experience told him otherwise. The way the man moved, the deliberate nature of his steps, the timing of his acceleration as the girl entered the more isolated section of the path, all of it triggered alarm bells in Marcus's mind. Emma remained completely unaware of the danger approaching from behind. She was thinking about the history test she had next week and wondering if she should study with her friend, Sarah. She adjusted her backpack on her shoulder and glanced up at the palace walls. admiring as she always did the intricate stonework and the flags fluttering in the breeze. The path ahead curved slightly to the left. Following the contour of the palace grounds, the man was now less than 20 feet behind her. His right hand moved inside his jacket, and Marcus saw something that made his blood run cold. It was just a flash, just a glimpse, but it was enough. The man was reaching for something, and whatever it was not good. Marcus did not wait to see more. Every second counted now. Without hesitation, Marcus abandoned his post and broke into a run. His boots pounded against the cobblestones as he sprinted toward the girl and the man pursuing her. Royal guards were not supposed to leave their assigned positions without permission, and doing so could result in serious disciplinary action. But Marcus was not thinking about regulations or consequences. He was thinking about a 14-year-old girl who had no idea she was in danger. The distance between them seemed to stretch on forever, even though it was only about 70 yards. Marcus ran faster than he had run in years, his uniform jacket flapping behind him, his breath coming in quick bursts. Tourists turned to stare at him, confused by the sight of a royal guard running at full speed. Some pulled out their phones. Thinking something important must be happening at the palace, Emma heard the running footsteps and turned around, her eyes widening in confusion. She saw the guard racing toward her, and then, following his gaze, she finally saw the man behind her. The man who was now pulling something from inside his jacket. The man whose face was twisted with anger and determination. The man whose intentions were suddenly, terrifyingly clear. Time seemed to slow down in that moment. Emma's mind could not quite process what was happening. Why was a man chasing her? Why did he look so angry? Why was a royal guard running toward her? Everything was happening too fast and yet not fast enough. She stood frozen on the path, unable to move, unable to scream, unable to do anything but watch as events unfolded around her. The man had fully drawn what he was holding now. It was a knife, long and gleaming in the afternoon sunlight. He raised it above his head as he closed the final distance to Emma, his face contorted with rage. Emma finally found her voice and screamed, a sound that pierced the quiet afternoon and sent birds scattering from the nearby trees. Marcus was still 10 yards away, pushing his body to its absolute limit. He could see everything with crystal clarity, the knife raised high. The girl's terrified face, the man's determined stride. Marcus knew he might not reach them in time. He knew that what happened in the next few seconds would determine whether a young girl lived or died. And he knew that he would do whatever it took, risk whatever needed to be risked, to protect her. Marcus launched himself forward in one final, desperate burst of speed, his legs burning with the effort. The distance between him and Emma was closing, but so was the distance between Emma and the attacker. The knife glinted wickedly in the sunlight as the man brought it down toward the terrified girl. Emma raised her arms instinctively to protect herself, her scream still echoing off the palace walls. In that split second, Marcus made a decision that would change everything. He threw himself between Emma and her attacker, his body colliding with the man just as the knife began its downward arc. The impact sent all three of them tumbling to the ground in a confused tangle of limbs. Emma hit the cobblestones hard, her backpack cushioning some of the fall, but the wind knocked out of her lungs. She gasped for air, her vision swimming with shock and fear. Marcus felt a sharp, burning pain across his left shoulder as the knife caught him during the collision. The blade had been meant for Emma, but had instead sliced through his uniform jacket and into his flesh. He ignored the pain, his training taking over as he grappled with the attacker. The man was strong, stronger than Marcus had expected, and was fighting with the desperate energy of someone who had nothing to lose. The two men rolled across the cobblestones, trying to gain control of the knife. Marcus could feel his shoulder bleeding, the warm wetness spreading across his uniform, but he pushed the sensation away. His only focus was on the weapon and keeping it away from Emma. The attacker's face was inches from his own, and Marcus could see the wild, unfocused look in his eyes. This was not a professional criminal or a calculated killer. This was someone operating on pure rage and emotion, which made him even more dangerous because he was unpredictable. Emma scrambled backward on the ground, her hands scraping against the rough stones. Her mind was screaming at her to run, to get away, but her legs would not cooperate. She watched in horror as the guard who had saved her fought for his life against a man who had tried to kill her. Why? The question pounded in her head. Why would anyone want to hurt her? She was nobody special, just a regular girl who went to school and came home every day. Nothing about this made sense. Tourists were screaming now, some running away from the violence while others stood frozen in shock. A few were filming on their phones, their modern instinct to document everything, overriding their common sense to either help or flee. Someone shouted for the police, and in the distance, Marcus could hear the whistle of another guard. Responding to the commotion, the attacker managed to break free from Marcus's grip for a moment and staggered to his feet. He still held the knife, his knuckles white around the handle. Blood dripped from Marcus's shoulder, staining the pristine cobblestones beneath him. The guard rose more slowly, his left arm hanging slightly limp from the wound, but his stance remained ready and defensive. He positioned himself firmly between Emma and the attacker, his body serving as a human shield. Marcus knew he was at a disadvantage. He was wounded, and his left arm was not responding properly. The attacker had a weapon and the willingness to use it. But Marcus also had years of combat training and the absolute certainty that he would not let this man reach Emma, not while he still had breath in his body. His commanding officer's words echoed in his mind, but they seemed irrelevant now. This was not about seeing and not reacting. This was about action, pure and simple. The attacker lunged forward again, the knife aimed at Marcus's chest. The guard sidestepped, his movements still quick despite his injury, and grabbed the man's wrist with his good hand. He twisted hard, using the momentum of the attacker's lunge against him, and drove his knee up into the man's stomach. The attacker gasped and doubled over, but his grip on the knife remained firm. Emma finally found the strength to move. She crawled behind a nearby bench, her whole body shaking uncontrollably. Tears streamed down her face, and she could taste salt on her lips. She wanted her mother. She wanted to be anywhere but here. She watched through the slats of the bench as the guard fought the man who had tried to kill her. And she felt an overwhelming sense of guilt. This guard, this stranger, was bleeding and hurt because of her. Because he had chosen to protect her instead of staying safe at his post. More guards were arriving now, their boots thundering on the cobblestones as they rushed to help their colleague. But they were still several seconds away, and in a knife fight, seconds meant everything. Marcus could hear them coming and felt a surge of relief, but he could not afford to be distracted. The attacker heard them too and seemed to realize his window of opportunity was closing. With a roar of frustration, the man made one final desperate attempt. He feinted left and then swung the knife in a wide arc aimed at Marcus's throat. It was a wild, uncontrolled move, born of panic rather than skill. Marcus dropped low, feeling the blade whistle past above his head, and then drove his shoulder into the attacker's midsection with all his remaining strength. The impact drove the man backward, and his feet tangled with the uneven cobblestones. The attacker fell hard, his head striking the ground with a sickening crack. The knife flew from his hand and skittered across the stones, coming to rest several feet away. Marcus did not hesitate. Despite the pain screaming through his shoulder, he threw himself on top of the fallen man and used his weight to pin him down. With his good hand, he grabbed the man's collar and held him firmly against the ground. The other guards arrived seconds later, surrounding the scene with weapons drawn. One of them, a young guard named Thomas, whom Marcus had trained personally, immediately kicked the fallen knife away and helped secure the attacker. Another guard, Sarah, rushed to Emma, kneeling beside the bench where the girl was hiding and speaking to her in soft, reassuring tones. A third guard pressed a radio to his mouth, calling for medical assistance and police backup. Marcus remained on top of the attacker, his breathing heavy and labored. Now that the immediate danger had passed, the pain from his shoulder was becoming impossible to ignore. He could feel his strength draining away with each drop of blood that soaked into his uniform. His vision started to blur slightly at the edges, and he felt Thomas's hands on him, gently trying to pull him back. The attacker beneath him had stopped struggling. His eyes were open but dazed, and there was a growing bump on the back of his head where he had struck the ground. He was muttering something under his breath, words that made no sense. fragments of sentences about betrayal and revenge and justice. Marcus realized then what he had suspected during the fight. This man was not well. Something had broken inside his mind, and that brokenness had nearly cost Emma her life. Thomas finally succeeded in pulling Marcus away from the attacker, and 2 other guards moved in to secure the man with handcuffs. Marcus stumbled backward, his legs suddenly feeling weak. Thomas caught him and helped lower him to sit on the same bench where Emma was still hiding. The young guard quickly removed his own jacket and pressed it against Marcus's bleeding shoulder. Applying pressure to slow the blood loss, Emma peeked out from behind the bench, found herself looking directly into Marcus's eyes. They were gray, she noticed, like storm clouds. And despite the pain he must be feeling, despite the blood and the violence that had just occurred, his expression was gentle. He managed a small smile, the kind meant to reassure a frightened child that everything would be okay. Marcus wanted to tell her she was safe now. She did not need to be afraid anymore. But his tongue felt thick in his mouth, and the words would not come. Instead, he just maintained that small smile and hoped it was enough. Emma stared back at him, her face pale and streaked with tears. She looked so young, so vulnerable, so completely unprepared for the violence that had just touched her life. Sarah. The guard tending to Emma wrapped a blanket around the girl's shoulders. It seemed an odd thing to do on a warm afternoon, but Emma was shaking so badly that the blanket was necessary. Shock had set in, and Sarah knew from experience that keeping Emma warm and calm was crucial. She continued speaking in low, soothing tones, asking Emma simple questions about her name and where she lived, trying to keep the girl focused and present. The sound of sirens filled the air as police cars and an ambulance arrived at the scene. The public walkway that had been so peaceful just minutes ago was now chaos. Officers immediately began securing the area, stretching yellow tape across the path and asking witnesses to stay for statements. Paramedics rushed toward Marcus and Emma, their medical bags already open and supplies ready. A female paramedic knelt beside Marcus, gently moving Thomas aside so she could assess the wound. She cut away the blood-soaked uniform jacket with practiced efficiency, revealing the deep gash across his shoulder. Marcus winced, but did not cry out, his military training helping him manage the pain. The paramedic spoke to him in a calm, professional voice, explaining what she was doing as she cleaned and bandaged the wound. She told him he was lucky. The knife had missed major arteries and would require stitches, but was not life-threatening. Another paramedic attended to Emma, checking her for injuries. Apart from some scrapes on her hands and knees from falling on the cobblestones, she was physically unharmed. But the paramedic could see the psychological trauma written all over the girl's face. Emma's eyes were distant and unfocused, her breathing shallow and rapid. The paramedic recognized the signs of shock and began treatment immediately. Speaking gently and reassuringly while checking her vital signs, police officers approached the attacker, who was now sitting up with his hands cuffed behind his back. 2 guards stood watch over him, while a police detective began asking questions. The man seemed more coherent now, though his answers were rambling and confused. He kept saying a name, Jennifer, over and over again. Jennifer had betrayed him. Jennifer had lied. Jennifer deserved to pay. The officers exchanged glances. This was clearly a case of mistaken identity. A man whose grief or anger or mental illness had led him to target an innocent girl who looked like someone from his past. Marcus watched all of this unfold through a haze of pain and exhaustion. His shoulder throbbed with every heartbeat, and he felt cold despite the warm afternoon sun. The paramedic working on him kept telling him to stay with her, to keep his eyes open, to keep talking. He tried to comply, answering her questions about his name, his age, whether he had any medical conditions. But his gaze kept drifting back to Emma. The girl was being helped to her feet now, the blanket still wrapped around her shoulders. Her parents had been called, and Sarah was staying close to her side, maintaining a comforting presence. Emma looked over at Marcus, and their eyes met again. In that moment, something passed between them, an understanding, a connection forged in violence and survival. Emma would never forget the man who had thrown himself between her and death, and Marcus would never forget the terrified girl he had sworn to protect. A senior officer approached Marcus. as the paramedics prepared to transport him to the hospital. The officer was in his 50s with gray hair and a weathered face that had seen too many crime scenes. He introduced himself as Captain Reynolds and told Marcus he would need a statement. But it could wait until after Marcus received proper medical treatment. The captain's expression was serious, but not unkind. He told Marcus that what he had done was incredibly brave, perhaps reckless, but ultimately heroic. Marcus tried to stand, wanting to walk to the ambulance on his own power, but his legs betrayed him. Thomas and another guard had to support him, one on each side, as they helped him toward the waiting vehicle. The crowd of tourists who had witnessed everything began to applaud. The sound started small, but grew, dozens of people clapping for the guard who had risked his life to save a child. Marcus felt his face flush with embarrassment. He had not done it for recognition or praise. He had done it because it was right, because a girl needed help, because that was what the uniform meant to him. Emma heard the applause and looked up. She saw Marcus being helped toward the ambulance, saw the bandages on his shoulder, saw how weak he looked. Something inside her broke, and she began to cry in earnest. These were not the silent tears of shock she had shed earlier, but deep, racking sobs that shook her whole body. Sarah held her close, letting the girl cry on her shoulder. Understanding that Emma needed this release, the paramedics loaded Marcus into the ambulance, carefully helping him onto the stretcher. One of them started an intravenous line to replace the blood he had lost, while the other secured the bandages and checked his vital signs again. Marcus lay back, finally allowing himself to relax a little. The worst was over. Emma was safe. The attacker was in custody. His job was done. But as the ambulance doors began to close, he heard a voice calling out. Emma had broken away from Sarah and was running toward the ambulance. The blanket falling from her shoulders, she reached the doors just as they were closing and pressed her hand against the glass window. Her face was streaked with tears, and her voice was choked with emotion as she called out to him. Marcus could not hear her words through the glass and over the sound of the ambulance engine, but he could read her lips. "Thank you," she was saying. "Thank you, thank you, thank you." Marcus lifted his good hand and pressed it against the glass from the inside, matching his palm to hers. He nodded once, a simple gesture that said everything that needed to be said. Then the ambulance pulled away, siren wailing, carrying him toward the hospital. Emma stood in the middle of the path, watching until the vehicle disappeared around a corner. Sarah came up beside her and gently led her back to where her parents had just arrived. Emma's mother, a woman named Claire, ran to her daughter and swept her into a fierce embrace. She had received a call from the police saying there had been an incident and that Emma was safe but shaken. The brief explanation had not prepared her for the scene she found. Police cars everywhere, crowds of people, blood on the cobblestones, and her daughter wrapped in a blanket and crying. Emma's father, Robert, was right behind his wife. His face pale with fear and relief, Emma collapsed into her mother's arms, and the story came pouring out between sobs. A man had tried to hurt her. A guard had saved her. There had been a knife. There had been blood. The guard was hurt because of her. Her parents listened in growing horror, holding their daughter tight and thanking God that she was alive. They learned from the police that if Marcus had not intervened when he did, they would likely be identifying their daughter's body instead of holding her at the hospital. Marcus was rushed into an examination room where doctors cleaned and stitched his wound. He required 23 stitches to close the gash. But the doctors confirmed what the paramedic had said. He had been lucky. The knife had cut deep into muscle but had missed the major blood vessels and nerves. With proper care and physical therapy, he would make a full recovery. He would have a scar, a permanent reminder of the day he had chosen duty over safety. But his arm and shoulder would function normally again. Captain Reynolds arrived at the hospital an hour later. To take Marcus's statement, the guard was sitting up in bed now, his shoulder properly bandaged and his arm in a sling. The pain medication had taken effect, and he felt foggy but functional. He told the captain everything he remembered. From the moment he first noticed the man in the dark jacket to the moment other guards arrived to secure the attacker, Reynolds recorded every detail, nodding occasionally and asking clarifying questions. When the statement was complete, Reynolds told Marcus what they had learned about the attacker. His name was David Morrison, age 41, with no criminal record, but a recent history of mental health issues. 3 months earlier, his wife Jennifer had left him and taken their daughter. Morrison had been unable to accept the separation and had become obsessed with the idea that his wife was poisoning his daughter against him. His mental state had deteriorated, and he had apparently fixated on Emma because she resembled his daughter. In his disturbed mind, Emma had become his daughter, and he had convinced himself that he needed to protect her from Jennifer's influence, even if that protection meant death. Marcus listened to this explanation with a heavy heart. Part of him had hoped the attacker was simply evil, a bad person who deserved punishment. But the truth was more complicated and more tragic. Morrison was a sick man who had needed help, not just for himself, but to prevent him from hurting others. The system had failed to catch him before he acted on his delusions. Marcus felt anger at that failure, but also a deep sadness for everyone involved, for Emma, who had been traumatized, for Morrison, who had lost himself to illness, and for Morrison's real daughter, who would now grow up knowing her father had tried to kill an innocent. Girl Reynolds seemed to read Marcus's thoughts. The captain had seen this before, had dealt with too many cases where mental illness intersected with violence. He told Marcus not to let it weigh on him, that Marcus had done everything right, that he had saved a life, and that was what mattered. But Reynolds also knew from experience that words alone could not erase the emotional toll of such events. News of the incident spread quickly. By evening, it was the top story on local news broadcasts and had been picked up by national media outlets. Video footage captured by tourists on their phones showed Marcus running toward Emma, the confrontation with the attacker, and the violent struggle that followed. The images were dramatic and disturbing, and news anchors praised Marcus as a hero who had put his life on the line to protect a child. Marcus's commanding officer, Colonel James Harrison, arrived at the hospital that evening. Harrison was a stern man in his 60s who had spent 40 years in military and royal service. He had a reputation for being tough but fair, and his guards respected him deeply. Harrison entered Marcus's room with a serious expression that Marcus could not quite read. The guard tried to sit up straighter, worried that he was about to be reprimanded for abandoning his post, but Harrison surprised him. The colonel pulled up a chair and sat down beside the hospital bed, his usually rigid posture relaxing slightly. He told Marcus that what he had done was technically against protocol. Royal guards were supposed to radio for backup and maintain their positions unless directly ordered to respond to a threat. By running toward Emma without authorization, Marcus had violated procedure and left his post unguarded. Marcus felt his heart sink. He knew this was true, knew that he had broken the rules, but he would make the same choice again in a heartbeat. He started to speak to defend his actions, but Harrison held up a hand to stop him. The colonel was not finished. He said that while Marcus had violated protocol, he had also exemplified everything that being a royal guard was supposed to represent. The uniform was not just about standing at attention and looking impressive for tourists. It was about protecting people, about having the courage to act when action was needed, about being willing to sacrifice for others. Harrison told Marcus that he would not face any disciplinary action. In fact, the colonel was recommending him for a commendation for bravery. The royal family themselves had been informed of the incident and had expressed their gratitude and admiration for Marcus's actions. Harrison's voice, usually so firm and commanding, softened as he told Marcus that he was proud of him. It was perhaps the highest compliment the colonel had ever given any of his guards. After Harrison left, Marcus lay alone in the quiet hospital room, processing everything that had happened. His shoulder ached despite the pain medication, and exhaustion was finally catching up with him. He thought about Emma and wondered how she was doing. He hoped her parents were taking care of her, that she had people around her who could help her process the trauma. He knew from experience that the psychological wounds would take longer to heal than his physical injury. Emma was indeed at home, surrounded by her parents and her older brother Daniel, who had rushed home from university when he heard what happened. The family doctor had come to check on her and prescribed something to help her sleep, but Emma was afraid to close her eyes. Every time she did, she saw the knife coming down toward her, saw the twisted expression on the attacker's face. heard her own scream echoing in her ears. Claire stayed by her daughter's side, holding her hand and stroking her hair the way she had when Emma was a small child with nightmares. Emma kept asking the same questions over and over. Why had that man wanted to hurt her? What had she done wrong? Why had the guard protected her when he did not even know her? Her mother tried to answer, tried to help her understand that sometimes terrible things happen to good people for no reason at all. But Emma's young mind struggled to make sense of the senseless. Robert sat at the kitchen table with Daniel, both of them dealing with their own emotions. Robert kept imagining what might have happened if that guard had not been there, and each imagined scenario was worse than the last. Daniel was angry, filled with a protective rage toward the man who had tried to hurt his little sister. He wanted Morrison to pay, wanted him to suffer. But his father reminded him that Morrison was sick and that anger would not help Emma heal. The next morning, Marcus was released from the hospital with instructions to rest, take his antibiotics, and return for a follow-up appointment in a week. Thomas arrived to drive him home, and on the way, the young guard updated Marcus on what had been happening. The incident was still dominating the news. Morrison had been charged with attempted murder and was undergoing psychiatric evaluation. Emma's family had declined most media interview requests but had released a statement thanking Marcus for saving their daughter's life. Thomas also mentioned that hundreds of people had been leaving flowers and messages at the spot where the attack occurred. It had become an impromptu memorial of sorts, though thankfully not to a victim, but to the act of heroism that had prevented one. Marcus was uncomfortable with the attention and praise. He kept insisting that he had simply done his job, that any of the other guards would have done the same. Thomas smiled and said that maybe, but Marcus was the one who had actually done it. When Marcus arrived at his small apartment, he found it difficult to settle into normalcy. He lived alone, having never married, and the silence felt oppressive after the noise and activity of the hospital. He tried to rest as the doctors had ordered, but his mind would not quiet. He kept replaying the incident, analyzing every decision, wondering if he could have done something differently or better. He knew this was pointless, that everything had turned out as well as could be expected. But his brain would not let it go. 2 days after the incident, Marcus received an unexpected visitor. Captain Reynolds called ahead to make sure Marcus was home, then arrived with a woman Marcus did not recognize. The woman was in her 40s, with kind eyes and a professional demeanor. Reynolds introduced her as Dr. Sarah Chen, psychologist who specialized in working with people who had experienced traumatic events. The captain explained that the Royal Guard service was requiring Marcus to attend a few sessions with Dr. Chen, not as punishment, but as support. Marcus wanted to protest that he was fine, that he did not need therapy. But Dr. Chen smiled gently and said that was what everyone said after traumatic incidents. She explained that what Marcus had experienced would affect him whether he acknowledged it or not, and that speaking with someone could help him process those effects in a healthy way. Reluctantly, Marcus agreed to the sessions. Reynolds left, and Dr. Chen spent the next hour simply talking with Marcus, establishing a rapport and helping him understand that seeking help was not weakness, but wisdom. Meanwhile, Emma was struggling to return to normal life. Her parents had kept her home from school for a few days, but that only seemed to make things worse. With nothing to occupy her mind, she fixated on the attack. She convinced herself that the man would somehow escape from custody and come back to finish what he started. She had nightmares every night, waking up screaming and covered in sweat. Her parents were becoming increasingly worried about her. Claire finally called a child psychologist recommended by their family doctor. The psychologist, Dr. Michael Torres, came to their home for the first session since Emma was afraid to leave the house. He spent time alone with Emma, letting her tell her story at her own pace, validating her fears, while also helping her understand that she was safe now. He explained that what she was experiencing was a normal reaction to an abnormal event, that her brain was trying to process something it was never meant to handle. Dr. Torres suggested that it might help Emma to meet with Marcus, to see that he was okay and recovering from his injury. Sometimes, trauma victims fixated on the person who saved them, worried about them, and feeling guilty about the harm they suffered. Seeing Marcus healthy and healing might help Emma begin to heal as well. The psychologist offered to reach out through official channels to see if Marcus would be willing to meet with Emma. When Dr. Chen brought up the same suggestion in Marcus's next therapy session, the guard was uncertain. He did not want to make things harder for Emma, did not want to remind her of the worst day of her life. But Dr. Chen explained that Emma was already thinking about him constantly, that she carried guilt about his injury, and that a meeting might actually help both of them. After some consideration, Marcus agreed. The meeting was arranged to take place at a neutral location, a private room at the palace administrative offices. Emma's parents would be present, as would Dr. Torres and Dr. Chen. The goal was simply to give Emma and Marcus a chance to talk in a safe, controlled environment. As the day of the meeting approached, both Emma and Marcus felt nervous for different reasons. Emma was afraid that Marcus would be angry with her for the trouble she had caused. Marcus was afraid that seeing him would traumatize Emma further. The morning of the meeting arrived with gray clouds and a light drizzle that matched Emma's nervous mood. She had barely slept the night before, her mind racing with worry about what she would say to Marcus. Her mother helped her pick out a simple dress, something nice but not too formal. And Claire reassured her daughter repeatedly that everything would be fine. Robert drove them to the palace, his hands gripping the steering wheel tightly as he navigated through morning traffic. Emma sat in the back seat, staring out the window at the rain-soaked streets. She had written and rewritten a speech in her head dozens of times, trying to find the perfect words to express her gratitude and apologize for the pain Marcus had suffered. But now, as they approached the palace gates, all those carefully planned words seemed to vanish from her mind. What if she froze? What if she started crying and could not stop? What if Marcus looked at her with disappointment or regret? At his own apartment across the city, Marcus was having similar doubts. He stood in front of his bathroom mirror, adjusting his civilian clothes and trying to decide if he looked too formal or not formal enough. His shoulder was healing well, but he still wore a sling to support it and reduce strain on the stitches. He wondered if the sling would frighten Emma, reminding her too vividly of what had happened. But the doctors had been clear that he needed to keep wearing it for at least another week. Thomas had offered to drive Marcus to the meeting, and the young guard arrived promptly at 9 in the morning. During the drive, Thomas tried to lighten the mood with casual conversation about work and the other guards. But Marcus remained quiet and thoughtful. He appreciated Thomas's attempt to distract him, but his mind kept returning to that moment when he had looked into Emma's terrified eyes as the ambulance doors closed. Would she still look at him with that same fear? They arrived at the palace administrative building 15 minutes early. Dr. Chen was already there, waiting in the lobby with a warm smile. She greeted Marcus kindly and led him to a comfortable meeting room on the second floor. The room was deliberately designed to feel non-threatening, with soft lighting, comfortable chairs arranged in a circle, and large windows that looked out over the palace gardens. A table along one wall held refreshments: tea, coffee, water, some biscuits. Dr. Chen explained the structure of the meeting to Marcus. There would be no pressure, no expectations. Emma and her parents would arrive shortly, and they would all sit together. Either Emma or Marcus could start the conversation, or Dr. Chen and Dr. Torres would guide them gently if needed. The most important thing was that both of them felt safe and heard. Marcus could leave at any time if he felt uncomfortable, and the same was true for Emma. Marcus nodded, his mouth suddenly dry despite the glass of water Dr. Chen had handed him. He heard voices in the hallway outside, and his heart began to beat faster. The door opened, and Dr. Torres entered first, followed by Claire and Robert, and finally Emma. The moment Emma saw Marcus sitting there, alive and real and not just a memory, her eyes filled with tears. Marcus stood up automatically, a gesture of respect and greeting, but the movement made Emma hesitate. She stood frozen in the doorway, one hand clutching her mother's arm. Claire gently encouraged her forward, and Emma took small, uncertain steps into the room. Marcus could see her hands trembling, could see the fear and hope and guilt all mixed together in her expression. He wanted to tell her it was okay, that she had nothing to fear from him, but he waited. Letting her move at her own pace, Dr. Torres guided everyone to their seats. Emma sat between her parents, with Dr. Torres beside her. Marcus sat across from them with Dr. Chen nearby. For a long moment, no one spoke. The silence was not uncomfortable exactly, but it was heavy with emotion and unspoken words. Emma kept her eyes fixed on her hands folded in her lap, occasionally glancing up at Marcus and then quickly looking away. Finally, it was Marcus who spoke first. His voice was gentle, the same tone he had used with frightened children who got separated from their parents at the palace. He told Emma that he was glad she was safe, that seeing her here and well made everything worth it. He said she had nothing to apologize for, nothing to feel guilty about, because what happened was not her fault. She had done nothing wrong. She was just a girl walking home from school, and she deserved to do that without fear. Emma looked up at him fully for the first time since entering the room. Tears were streaming down her face, and she was shaking her head. Her voice came out as barely a whisper when she finally spoke. She said she was sorry, so sorry, that he got hurt. She had nightmares about it every night, saw him bleeding because of her. She told him she did not know why that man wanted to hurt her, did not understand what she had done to deserve it, and she could not stop thinking that Marcus might have died. And it would have been because he tried to save her. Claire wrapped her arm around her daughter's shoulders, and Robert reached over to take Emma's hand. But Marcus leaned forward in his chair, his expression earnest and kind. He told Emma to look at him, really look at him. He was fine. Yes, he had been hurt, but he was healing and would be back to full duty in a few weeks. The scar he would carry was not a mark of regret, but a reminder that he had done his job, that he had protected someone who needed protection. Marcus explained that being a royal guard meant being ready to put himself between danger and innocent people. It was not just a job to him, but a calling, a purpose. When he saw that man following her, when he realized she was in danger, there was no question in his mind about what he would do. He would run to help her. He would protect her. And he would make the same choice again without hesitation, because that was who he was and what he believed in. Emma listened to his words, her crying gradually subsiding into quiet sniffles. She asked him if he was angry at her, if he blamed her for breaking his routine or getting him in trouble. Marcus smiled and shook his head. He told her the truth, that his commanding officer had called him a hero. He had received a commendation, and that the royal family had sent him a personal letter of gratitude. But more than any of that, he felt peace knowing that he had been in the right place at the right time. Dr. Torres gently interjected, just asking Emma if she understood what Marcus was telling her. Emma nodded slowly. The psychologist explained that sometimes bad things happen to good people. It was natural to want to find a reason or someone to blame. But the only person responsible for the attack was David Morrison, the man who was sick and acted on his delusions. Neither Emma nor Marcus had caused it. They were both victims of circumstances beyond their control. Claire spoke up then, her own voice thick with emotion. She thanked Marcus on behalf of their entire family. She told him that they had been living in a nightmare since the attack, imagining over and over what would have happened if he had not been there. She said there were no words adequate to express their gratitude. But she wanted him to know that he had given them the most precious gift imaginable, their daughter's life. Robert added that if Marcus, anything at all, their family would be there. He said they felt indebted to him in a way that could never be repaid. Marcus shifted uncomfortably at this, insisting that he needed no repayment and wanted no debt between them. He had done what any decent person would do, what his training and conscience demanded. But Robert shook his head firmly and said that whether Marcus wanted it or not, he had their eternal gratitude and friendship. As the conversation continued, the tension in the room gradually eased. Emma found herself able to look at Marcus without immediately thinking of blood and violence. Instead, she began to see him as a person, someone with his own fears and doubts. Someone who had been scared during the attack but acted anyway. She asked him if he had been afraid, and Marcus answered honestly, yes, he had been terrified. Terrified that he would not reach her in time, that he would fail to protect her, that he would have to watch her die. This admission, his vulnerability, helped Emma more than anything else could have. She had thought of Marcus as fearless, as somehow superhuman. Learning that he had been afraid to, that he had acted despite his fear, made his heroism even more meaningful. It showed her that courage was not the absence of fear, but the choice to do what was right even when afraid. The meeting lasted nearly 2 hours. though it felt both longer and shorter to everyone involved. Dr. Chun and Dr. Torres guided the conversation skillfully, helping Emma and Marcus explore their feelings and begin the process of healing. By the end, Emma was no longer crying, and there was even a small smile on her face when Marcus shared a funny story about his early days as a royal guard when he had gotten lost in the palace and ended up in the royal kitchens by mistake. As the meeting drew to a close, Emma asked Marcus a question that surprised everyone. She wanted to know if she could write to him, maybe update him on how she was doing as she recovered from the trauma. She said it would help her to know that he was okay too, that his shoulder was healing properly. Marcus looked to Dr. Chen, uncertain if this was appropriate, but the psychologist nodded encouragingly. Having a continued connection, as long as it remained healthy and boundaried, could be beneficial for both of them, Marcus agreed. And they exchanged contact information with the understanding that Dr. Torres and Dr. Chen would monitor their communication to ensure it remained therapeutic and appropriate. Emma's parents added their own contact information as well, reiterating their invitation for Marcus to reach out if he ever needed anything. Robert mentioned that he owned a small construction company and would be happy to help if Marcus ever needed work done on his apartment or wanted to renovate anything as they prepared to leave. Emma did something that surprised even herself. She walked over to Marcus and asked if she could give him a hug. Marcus looked to her parents for permission, and when they nodded, he carefully stood and opened his good arm. Emma stepped into the embrace, and for the first time since the attack, she felt truly safe. This was the man who had saved her life, and being close to him brought comfort rather than fear. The hug lasted only a few seconds, but it was exactly what both of them needed. When they separated, Emma was smiling through fresh tears. But these were different tears, tears of relief and gratitude, rather than fear and guilt. She told Marcus one more time that she would never forget what he did for her, and he responded that he would never forget her courage in facing her fears today. After Emma and her family left, Dr. Chen sat with Marcus for a few more minutes to debrief. She asked how he was feeling, and Marcus admitted he felt lighter somehow, as if a weight he did not know he was carrying had been lifted. Seeing Emma healing, hearing her laugh even briefly, made his injury feel worthwhile in a way that abstract knowledge of having saved her life had not quite achieved. Dr. Chen smiled and told him this was an important step in his own recovery process. Over the following weeks, Emma and Marcus exchanged occasional messages. Emma sent updates about returning to school, about walking past the palace path again for the first time, about the nightmares gradually becoming less frequent. Marcus shared his progress in physical therapy, the frustration of limited mobility, and eventually the joy of being cleared to return to light duty. Their communication was brief and appropriate, but it provided comfort and connection for both of them. Emma's recovery was not linear or easy. She had setbacks, days when the fear overwhelmed her again and she could not bring herself to leave the house. Dr. Torres continued working with her, using various therapeutic techniques to help her process the trauma. Claire and Robert were patient and supportive, never pushing her, but always encouraging her to take small steps forward. Daniel visited from university whenever he could, bringing a protective presence that helped Emma feel secure. 3 months after the attack, Emma achieved a significant milestone. She walked the entire palace path alone for the first time since the incident. Her hands shook as she approached the spot where it had happened, now marked only by some faded flower petals from the memorial that had been there. But she kept walking, kept breathing, and made it all the way home. She immediately sent Marcus a message telling him about her accomplishment. In his response, a simple, "I'm proud of you," meant more to her than any elaborate praise could have. Marcus returned to full duty for months after the incident. His shoulder had healed completely, and the scar was now just a thin white line barely visible beneath his uniform. Colonel Harrison assigned him to a different post, one with less foot traffic and lower risk. But Marcus requested to return to his original position near the palace path. He wanted to be there, wanted to stand watch over the place where he had once fought to protect an innocent girl. Harrison understood and approved the request. The first day back at his old post felt strange to Marcus. Tourists still took photographs. The path was still peaceful, and everything looked the same. But Marcus was different. He saw potential threats more clearly now, was more alert to unusual behavior, more ready to trust his instincts. He also found himself watching for a girl with a backpack and brown hair tied in a ponytail, hoping to see Emma pass by safely on her way home from school. 6 months after the attack, something unexpected happened. Marcus was at his post when he saw Emma approaching, walking with confident steps and a smile on her face. She waved when she spotted him, and he waved back, both of them grinning. She stopped to chat briefly, telling him she was doing well, that she was back to normal school attendance, that she had even joined the debate team, which was helping her find her voice again. Marcus told her how proud he was of her courage and resilience. As Emma turned to leave, she paused and looked back at him. She said that she had been thinking a lot about what she wanted to do with her life, about what kind of person she wanted to become. The attack had shown her how fragile life was, and how important it was to make choices that mattered. She told Marcus that she had decided she wanted to help people too. Maybe become a social worker or a counselor, so she could support others who had experienced trauma. Marcus felt his eyes prick with unexpected tears and told her that she would be amazing at whatever she chose to do. David. Morrison's trial took place 7 months after the attack. He was found not guilty by reason of insanity and was committed to a psychiatric facility for long-term treatment. Emma did not attend the trial, but her parents did. Wanting to see justice served while also understanding that Morrison was a sick man who needed help rather than punishment, the judge acknowledged Marcus's heroism during the sentencing hearing. Noting that his quick action had prevented a tragedy, a year after the incident, the palace held a formal ceremony to present Marcus with his commendation for bravery. It was a public event attended by members of the royal family, other guards, government officials, and media. Marcus wore his dress uniform, uncomfortable with the attention but understanding the importance of the recognition. When the medal was pinned to his chest, the audience applauded, and Marcus saw Emma and her family sitting in the front row, clapping louder than anyone else. After the ceremony, there was a reception where Marcus mingled awkwardly with various dignitaries who wanted to shake his hand and thank him for his service. But the moment he valued most came when Emma approached with her family. She had grown taller in the past year, looked more mature and confident. She congratulated him on the award and told him that she was doing well, really well, and that she wanted him to know his sacrifice had not been wasted. She was living a full life, pursuing her dreams, and she would never take a single day for granted. Robert presented Marcus with a gift from the family, a beautiful watch engraved with the date of the incident and the simple words to the man who gave us everything. Rakusa protested that it was too much, but Claire insisted, saying it was a small token of gratitude that could never truly express what they felt. Daniel shook Marcus's hand firmly and told him that he had given their family a future, and that was priceless. As the reception wound down and guests began to leave, Marcus stood alone for a moment near a window overlooking the palace gardens. He touched the medal on his chest and thought about everything that had happened in the past year. The attack had changed him. It forced him to confront danger in its rawest form and make split-second decisions that determined life or death. But it had also shown him the true meaning of his uniform and his duty. Colonel Harrison approached and stood beside him in companionable silence for a moment before speaking. The colonel told Marcus that courage was not something you were born with, but something you chose in critical moments. Marcus had chosen courage when it mattered most, and that choice had rippled outward in ways he might never fully understand. Emma would grow up, have a career, maybe a family of her own someday. All of that existed because Marcus had been willing to risk everything Marcus thought about. Emma's plan to help others who had experienced trauma, about how one act of protection was inspiring her to dedicate her life to healing. He thought about the other guards who had told him his actions, who reminded them why they had joined the service in the first place. He thought about the tourists who had witnessed the attack and later wrote letters saying it had restored their faith in human goodness. One moment, one choice, had created waves of impact he was only beginning to understand. Thomas found Marcus before he left the reception and asked him how it felt to be officially recognized as a hero. Marcus considered the question carefully before answering. He said it felt good to be honored, but the real reward had come months ago, when Emma first smiled at him without fear in her eyes. That was the moment he had known, truly known, that everything had been worth it. The medal was beautiful and meaningful, but it was just metal and ribbon. Emma's healing, her courage, determination to turn trauma into purpose, that was the real legacy of that terrible afternoon, that evening. Marcus returned to his apartment and carefully placed the medal in a drawer. He would treasure it, but he did not need to display it to remember why he did what he did. The scar on his shoulder was reminder enough. More than that, the image of Emma walking confidently past his post every week, waving and smiling, was all the reward he would ever need. Emma went home that night and wrote in her journal, something Dr. Torres had encouraged her to do as part of her healing process. She wrote about the ceremony, about how proud she felt seeing Marcus honored, about how strange it was that something so terrible had led to something meaningful. She wrote that she was no longer defined by being a victim, but was instead becoming someone who understood suffering and wanted to ease it for others. She wrote that Marcus had not just saved her life that day, but had shown her what kind of person she wanted to become. Someone brave enough to act when others needed help. Even at personal cost, years would pass, and both Emma and Marcus would move forward with their lives. Forever changed by those few minutes of violence and heroism, Emma would eventually become a trauma counselor, helping countless people find their way through darkness. Marcus would continue serving as a royal guard, eventually training new recruits and teaching them that the uniform meant more than ceremony. It meant being ready to sacrifice for others. They would stay in touch over the years, their connection evolving from trauma bonding into genuine friendship built on mutual respect and shared understanding. And whenever Emma faced a difficult moment, whenever doubt crept in about whether she was strong enough or brave enough, she would remember the gride guard who had thrown himself between her and death. And she would find the courage to keep going. Because if Marcus could risk everything for a stranger, surely she could face whatever challenges life brought her way. The story of the young girl attacked near the palace, and the royal guard who saved her became part of local legend, told and retold as an example of heroism and human goodness. But for Marcus and Emma, it was simply the worst and best day of their lives. Worst for the violence and fear, best for the courage and connection that emerged from it. And both of them knew that while they could never change what happened, they could choose what it meant, what it taught them, how it shaped the people they would become.